Hi, I will also be responding to the claim that adapting to a plant-based diet has numerous benefits beyond saving animals' lives. Now, to summarize again what the original claims were that one, a plant-based diet provides health advantages that and the subclaims to that were that it makes weight loss easier and has certain benefits towards disease prevention. The second claim was that a plant-based diet helps clean and restore the environment. They started off with a statistic about how a large percentage of these greenhouse gases are from the top 5 meat and dairy corporations. They made a claim that less resources are needed for plant-based foods versus animal products. And their final claim was that waste from factory farms are destroying habitats. Now today I will be responding to the subclaim of the first claim that a plant-based diet has certain properties that aid in disease prevention, as well as the claim that less resources are needed for plant-based foods versus animal products. Now, the source that they originally used talking about the health benefits of a plant-based diet was a list of 11 facts on a change.org page. This page didn't have an author, it didn't have a date, it did have a bibliography of its own. However, most of the sources were published around 2000, and the most recent one was published in 2013, and it was an outlier. Looking at the access dates in that bibliography, it looks like the page was published around November of 2014. So a lot of these sources are a bit older. One of the facts that the original claim pointed to was a study by Nobel Prize winner Elizabeth Blackburn. Now she earned that Nobel Prize for her research on telomeres, which are defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as the natural end of a eukaryotic chromosome composed of a usually repetitive DNA sequence and serving to stabilize the chromosome. Essentially, they're the caps on the end of our chromosomes, and as we age, they tend to get shorter and degrade. Now, later studies that Elizabeth Blackburn and other colleagues worked on were looking at how lifestyle changes could aid in preventing that degradation of the telomeres. And it's those studies that were referred to in this list, talking about the benefits of a plant-based diet. Now, I could not find a lot of information on studies, follow-up studies to these original ones, and I couldn't find a lot of information that wasn't published by Blackburn herself or her colleagues. The most recent credible information I could find was a Forbes article in 2019 by Larry Houston, who is a medical journalist for Forbes. In it, talking about that study, he said, quote, "There's a large gap between the conclusions of the paper, which sensibly state that the study was very small and needs to be replaced in larger populations, and Ornish's, who was a co-author to Blackburn, statements, which promise that aging can be reversed at the cellular level, seemingly for people at all ages." So, for the most part, the study that the original claim was based on has not been largely corroborated by the scientific community. And there have been other studies conducted that showed that, for example, the Mediterranean diet, which does allow meat and animal products in smaller amounts, also have shown to have similar benefits. The second claim that I wanted to refer to remind you was that less resources are needed for plant-based foods versus animal products. Now, while it is true that, as the original claim statistic said, quote, "It takes at least 13,000 liters and more of water to produce 1 kilo of beef in comparison to only 1,000 to 2,000 liters for most plants," it's also true that there are a large amount of plants produced in the United States that require a large amount of water. For example, For example, walnuts, which are actually, going back to the health benefits on the American Institute for Cancer Research's Foods That Fight Cancer, walnuts use 50.3 gallons per ounce of water, which is compared to the 9.7 gallons per ounce that beef uses, which was converted from that statistic that was originally used in the claim. So while it is true that that in general animals require more water than plants, it is also true there are a large amount of popular plants that are produced in the United States that require a large amount of water, and that are also, while walnuts are not fed to animals, are also fed to the animals, so that water is added on. Thank you.
Okay, well, the structural stuff is all fine at the beginning. You identified the source of the advocate's evidence and you criticize it because the information is relatively old. You want to give us an explanation about why the age of that information is relevant. I think you have a point later on where you said recent studies on the Mediterranean diet show that people can maintain health with the inclusion of meat as long as they have a right balance. That would have been something that would have been a good update to compare to that criticism that you had of the older evidence. And then you kind of get, I don't want to say sidetracked entirely, but you definitely get caught up with this idea about the Blackburn evidence and the fact that they made this inference about how you can maybe stop aging at a cellular level by changing some of the ways that people eat. There's a generic evaluation of the research that was done. You've got an independent source that talks about, there's a big gap between what they are saying and what was demonstrated. You have your own claim that there isn't a lot of follow-up research on this or new research on this except for the ones that they've published. And I think that those are good criticisms. I just don't know that they were the key things that the advocate was citing. So you do spend time on that point, and I'm not sure how far it gets you. I thought that the last argument on that point that said that we have other ways that you can achieve the same kinds of results, that was a good claim. I didn't hear an evidence citation on that. So, you've gone after the evidence that the advocate presented, but you should be providing a piece of supporting evidence on that particular point yourself. On the second point on resources, and you have a couple of comparisons that I think are interesting, like the walnut comparison about the amount of water that it uses compared to meat production. I think that's a perfectly valid comparison since the advocate used comparisons of meat production to other kinds of food products. I'm not sure how important it is that whether or not the food products get served to animals or not. Walnuts not necessarily used as cattle feed, but it does seem to suggest that the notion there are various amounts of water used for a variety of products. That is true, but I think you might also point out if we've got that much amount of water for producing walnuts, why are we worried about the 1/5 as much water that's used to produce animals, which even though it is 7 times as much as is used to produce these other things, we still don't have any reason to believe that there's a problem with the amount of water that we have for these agricultural purposes. It just feels like you went after one piece of information, didn't give us quite the impact of that argument, and I think you're missing some other low-hanging fruit on this particular point. Low-hanging fruit, I'm sorry. Food references. Thank you.